behavior, I mean, like, it's usually not too hard to tell. Most of the pitches we get that are just copy-pasted, right? If you're just copying and pasting the same thing and sending it to many investors, you're almost guaranteed not to get a response. And like, we kind of just skip those and ignore those. It's pretty clear when someone has actually bothered to research who we are and reach out to us in a personalized way. And if it's just copy-pasted, yeah.
For sure. Cindy?
Yeah, and then, yeah, from a broader perspective, also in terms of evaluating crypto projects or blockchain projects, a couple of questions that you want to ask. One, do you need a blockchain? Another is, do you need a token? Because a lot of times people are raising in a fashion where they say, we're going to do an ICO, we're going to have this token because this is the format that we're fundraising. And a lot of times it might even make more sense for that company to raise in a purely equity structure because what they're building might not need an inherent token. And then the third question would be, are you forcing functionality into a token that actually increases friction? Because a lot of times the appeal of having a token or investing in crypto projects is you are actually taking this new technology and reducing friction due to current inefficiencies in the way that our world or our transfer value is set up. And so if you have a token, because you might think it's an easy fundraising mechanism to do an ICO, are you actually designing the incentives around the token so that it makes sense for other people to want to buy, use, transact with the token, and for investors to hold on to it? Sometimes we'll see situations where people force functionality into a token that shouldn't necessarily exist. Sometimes a token exists for payments when you're better off using the native token of the blockchain that you're building on top of. In some cases, a token forces kind of this holding function, whether that's through artificial kind of incentives to get people to hold the token for longer because it for some reason increases value. And I think in that case, it's because people believe that reducing velocity of the token actually makes it more valuable. I think that is a thesis that's yet to be seen. And so if you are sort of introducing these artificial constraints just for the sake of having an ICO, those are some huge red flags.
Yeah, I think both Kyle and Cindy both talked about pretty much two of the main ones. I mean, again, tech teams, I think for us, I mean, focus, a lot of people, there's so many different opportunities to do things in this space. And, some people want to do everything. I think for us, I mean, it's going to be a long journey. We're so early in this that, you kind of should take a step-by-step approach and not sort of try to paint everything that you're trying to do, but basically just kind of have everything, be more focused on what's going to be this first step. How are we going to dominate this ball? This is going to be the second step. This is going to be the third step. I think that's something that, we really want to preach in this space is that you don't need to raise that much money. You don't need to do everything, but you just need to do one thing and do it well. Outside of that, I mean, it's looking at, if there's no tech team even present on the first few members of the executive team, then, that could be a red flag. Over promising millions of transactions per second. I mean, sort of things that just we know aren't feasible that kind of are put on there more for sales tactics. I mean, we can kind of catch those things. And just kind of, I think that the last thing would be looking at the problem that's trying to be solved and looking at the team behind it and seeing if there's any sort of relationship in terms of seeing whether that team has the right background to solve the problem that they're trying to solve.
Great. So you've all mentioned the importance of great teams as something that you look for and something that's important to the success of a project. Historically, the other thing that investors looked for was tech moats, but we're in this new paradigm where people don't, or projects founders don't own their intellectual property. Projects are code is open source. What other barriers to entry are you looking for, or are you not really looking for barriers to entry anymore other than the aforementioned awesome tech teams? Paul?
Yeah, so one thing we look for typically is a way to get network effects going. And depending on the kind of token it is, there's different kinds of network effects that can accrue. So, for example, if you look at things like smart contract platforms, so things like Ethereum, Infinity, EOS, Cadena, these kinds of things, in these systems, our hypothesis is that there's going to be a network effect around using it as a medium of exchange and as a currency within these respective ecosystems. And so one thing we're looking for when we make those kinds of bets is, after, not just once we make the investment, we're looking to track the blockchain and see, is there more usage happening? Are more people building applications and using them in connected commerce? And if there is, then we believe that's going to kind of aggregate support our hypothesis, and then that snowball is going to keep rolling, and we'll keep getting more network effects. So that's one of the major things we look for, is ways to get network effects.
Yeah, I'd say that's exactly what I was going to say, network effects. And, it depends. I mean, if you're building a new platform, then it's, can you provide, I think across, whether it's more of, an application platform versus sort of a new blockchain, at the end of the day, it's all about messaging and it's all about usability. So companies that can focus on both of those and be able to do it well, I think will sort of create good network effects for people to onboard onto the platform and stick on the platform, and then build sort of a network effect around usage. So I think that's one of the things that we tell our companies is, technology and communication right now is extremely complicated. You can figure out a way to communicate with developers, communicate with mainstream audiences if you're building a consumer product, businesses if you're trying to do business development partnerships, get them to kind of understand what you're doing and be passionate about it. Those network effects will come.
Yeah, and to sort of add on to this, I completely agree that in some cases a lot of the tech is open sourced, and so the tech might be easy to copy, but the things that aren't necessarily easy to port over from one project to another, if, for example, if you just fork the code base on GitHub, is the community that's been built up around the original project, and also the brand. And a lot of times the community involves like the developers, businesses, etc., that are built on top of the original project. And also in terms of the I guess from thinking about the more technical perspective, even if you fork the code base that's currently existing on GitHub, if the technical team of the secondary project is not as strong as the first project, as new updates are rolled, necessarily to copy it over. And so we're also looking for the fact that the technical team working on the branch off or the fork or sort of like that the split part of that project is just as strong as the original one. And then along with that, I agree with you that a lot of times the code base for these projects are open source, but we are starting to see some more examples of development teams saying, hey, we're going to open source the bulk part of our code, but for some parts of it, we're going to leave it closed source because we have a monetization plan behind not publishing some parts of the code that we want to take advantage of. And I know that we are all very pro decentralization, but we're also very pro having like a working business model. So we are okay with that in some cases.
Right. So I'm seeing a lot of chatter. I was seeing a lot of chatter here about ICOs and hype and gold rush. Can you guys give me your perspective on the regulatory landscape right now and how it affects the methods of fundraising projects are using? Is it the right time to be doing an ICO? Should companies be pursuing equity rounds? What do you think? Cindy?
Yeah. So for the current regulatory landscape, it's definitely a lot more scrutiny than it was 4 years ago or 5 years ago. So right now, what the regulators are watching out for is that their main incentive is to make sure that regular, normal consumers aren't screwed over by investing in something that is fraudulent. So they're very focused on consumer protection right now. And they also, and a lot of times the way in which that is expressed is through securities laws, because the fundraising for a project that has not yet been developed technically falls under the category of a security. And if you're selling a security, you need a lot of licenses in order to be able, to promote it or to do certain things in terms of fundraising from that perspective. And then if you're an investor investing in a securities offering, you have to either actually be an accredited investor or reach some threshold for proving that you're not, like an everyday retail investor that can be scammed or taken advantage of. So, but the other thing that the regulators need to balance is not stifling innovation, because the issue is if, for example, in the US, we're very strict about ICOs and we say that they're banned, etc., then a lot of these projects might go to overseas jurisdictions in order to raise funding or to set up their project. And then in that case, the current jurisdiction that we all live in might lose out on technical talent. So regulators, sort of have to thread the needle between protecting consumers, but also not stifling innovation. And in that case, I personally don't have an issue if a project decides to raise an equity or ICO or raise right now as an regulations aren't clear, but then have some clause in the term sheet that says, if they issue tokens later on, the equity will convert in some way to crypto tokens, etc. That might be the way that I've more recently seen projects do it, whereas maybe like a year ago, more people were willing to raise, just as a pure token sale.
It definitely, I've noticed that trend as well.
Yeah, I think, I think Cindy for kind of giving the background of all of that and really why it's so important for us to, for the U.S. to kind of figure this out. And of course, for projects themselves, I think if you don't know what you're going to do in terms of, and that's also another topic too, is like, if you don't even know kind of what your token's going to be used for, then likely your project probably doesn't need a token. But sometimes, again, it's just complex. You want to make sure that you get it right. So raising a convertible note or raising equity round first and then kind of figuring out how that ties to the token sale later is probably a good idea. Gives you a little bit of capital, get your team together, build an MVP, get your white paper together, because all of that does cost money. Again, with more legal scrutiny, your legal costs are going to be higher than it was before. But if you are and you have the ability to do so, and you want to go out there, you have a pretty clear plan of what your token is going to be used for. It's sort of a new blockchain or something, and the use cases are a little bit more straightforward, and you have the ability to raise a large amount of money, then you may want to go straight for a pure token sale. I think other strategies that people are employing these days are knowing that the United States and securities laws can be onerous, blocking U.S. entities and raising mostly or all from international investors or people with international entities, and doing all of these sales privately and not actually opening up to the crowd. So that's becoming more common too.
So backtracking to a few minutes ago, Cindy mentioned that we're seeing projects now that keep a portion of the IP private closed source. Someone, Bill, has asked, how long do you think that it's okay for a project to protect its IP, i.e. file patents or keep the code closed source? Anyone can jump in here. And do you think that it's detrimental to building a community?
I think it definitely depends on the situation. Like, it's hard to have a hard and fast rule, but I would say like maybe a general guideline would be, if you put enough code out in the world in terms of open source for other people, like developers, to play around with, build on top of, and they feel like you don't necessarily have complete control over like exactly what they are building on top of. Because the worst thing, I guess, for a developer who's building something on top of your blockchain or your project is for you to be able to unilaterally make a change that affects their business one day. And that sort of like goes against the ethos of decentralization, where like all stakeholders in an ecosystem, including the users, developers, miners, etc., a lot of those stakeholders have input in addition to the original coin developers. And so where I think it gets detrimental is that if people who are using the code base that you're building on top of feel like they don't necessarily have a say. And I think it's actually okay to keep parts of it closed source in terms of it might be adjacent to the core blockchain that you're working on. So an example of that might be if you're developing a blockchain and open sourcing the code, but then the adjacent business that you're building is something that, you're taking, you'll be able to like process transactions on top of it and take a cut of it, or you're developing like specialized mining equipment for it, for example. And so I think in that case, it wouldn't necessarily be detrimental to the business that those developers are building, but it's just something else that you're sort of doing on the side to run your own business and be able to monetize by yourself.
Great, thanks. That's super helpful. Okay, so what's a contrarian opinion that each of you holds about the crypto space? Kyle, we will start with you, because I know you'll hold many.
So, all right, one view I hold been developing recently, and I have reasonable conviction in now, is that in about 2 to 3 years, privacy will no longer be like a trade-off to get. It'll be basically a feature that is just given for free, so to speak, and that any chain can incorporate in a pretty trivial and easy way. My sense is that's about 3 years away from happening. I think today, given the challenges of implementing privacy in a meaningful way, that's not considered a free feature, so to speak. But I think in about 3 years, it'll be a trivial thing to integrate into kind of any major crypto project.
Yeah, I actually agree with Kyle on that. I think someone posed that question. I'm on the same viewpoint as that. I think something else. It's probably contrarian in terms of most people's investment theses, but I think for us, like, we're still excited about investing into decentralized applications themselves, and we're happy to invest into scalability projects, but we've been really picky about those ones. I mean, I think since our ICO fund is focused just on pre-sales, we want to be diversified, but then also feel that it's going to take a lot of time to build these applications, and we know for sure none of them are ready to actually sort of get out to scale. But as we've seen from Augur and how long it sort of takes to even just develop the contracts and the UI and the UX and security for some of these decentralized applications, if it makes sense for a product to be decentralized, to enable a new market or to reduce fees from incumbents, then we'll be happy to make those investments. So I'd say number-wise, most of our investments are in non-scalability projects, but dollar-wise is probably the other way around.
I have sort of a contrarian opinion in terms of scalability projects, particularly as it pertains to smart contract platforms. So a lot of the more recent pitches and ideas that have been super compelling that we've been seeing have been on projects that are honing in on like the scalability issues of Ethereum and Bitcoin blockchains. And they say like, we're faster, we're X thousand transactions per second, we're more scalable, etc. And so a lot of times like investors and even we will sort of like spread our bets across these projects because we don't know which one will win. And I've heard from other investors that one of the reasons why they're investing in a lot of these is because they think that there'll be almost like this multiplicity of different tokens and smart contract platforms, and they'll all be talking to each other, etc. I actually think that there will be a convergence on the dominance of a single, maybe one or two smart contract platforms. And the reason is because there's a lot of, I guess we mentioned earlier, network effects, but also brand reliability, developer kind of capture that goes along with having a particular dominant smart contract platform. And so even though while we're spreading out our bets with multiple of these, I do think a lot of them might be not
to, or other than privacy and scalability, is there a trend or innovation happening now that really excites you?
One recent thing that people have gotten like super excited about is non-fungible tokens. And basically what these are they are tokens where each individual one is a different, separate, distinct asset. So you can have like your own distinct, for example, CryptoKitty that's very different from someone else's. So you can't like one Augur token is the same as any other Augur token, but a CryptoKitty is distinct and different. And one of the reasons why this is a pretty exciting recent development is because the space of utility tokens, a lot of times, it's sort of, you run into issues with like, is this a security or not? And so people have been sort of like cautious because of the regulatory aspect. But for non-fungible tokens, because they're digital assets, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is they might have a different classification where they're not necessarily considered securities, they're considered property, etc. And in that case, some of the innovation that people were very excited about in terms of utilities, some of that might be pushed more towards the non-fungible token and digital asset space.
Non-fungible tokens is a great one. Kyle?
Yeah, I think the thing I'm kind of most excited about right now is all the infrastructure that's being built out to support end-user applications. I've been working on a post, I think I'm going to publish it tomorrow, kind of outlining what I call the Web3 stack, and kind of just showing all the different parts and pieces. And one thing that became very clear to me as I put together this post is when I actually draw the Web3 stack out, none of the pieces, like the stack isn't finished. And so you've got people trying to build end-user applications on top of infrastructure that is not finished yet. And so the thing I'm most excited to see over the next 6 months is really seeing the core pieces of infrastructure, at least 1.0 of every piece, so that you can start to get more meaningful end-user applications. But for now, yeah, it's still a major challenge. So I'm most excited about getting the infrastructure together.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with both of those guys. We've invested into NFTs pretty recently, non-fungible tokens, and we continue to invest into infrastructure. I think one big trend that we're looking at quite a bit is security tokens. And, again, I think we're all actually investors in Harbor, and that's a platform to kind of help issue security tokens. And again, it's going to start off on infrastructure. There's going to be more types of those companies. There are going to be more types of security token exchanges. There are going to be more types of things around reg tech around that, and the issuance, etc. So I think that's going to be a tremendous market. I think that's going to be a tremendous market, probably even larger outside the United States than inside the United States. And then I think another trend that's happening quite a bit this year is there's just a lot of activity outside the United States. So you really do have to be plugged into China and Korea. A lot of the infrastructure that happens here is going to be sort of ported over there in terms of them also needing infrastructure. And at the end of the day, this is decentralized, technology is global. But before a lot of the consolidation that Cindy talks about, I think there's going to be some more fragmentation around infrastructure, and then comes the consolidation. But because again, building community, a lot of that starts with sort of knowing the community itself and language barriers, etc. We're going to see a lot of that fragmentation, and we're going to be looking for those types of infrastructures outside the United States.
Great. And how about a specific project that you've either recently invested in or eager to invest in that's really exciting you? Kyle?
Oh, man. I know I've got a couple I'm not supposed to talk about.
Well, now would be the perfect place to talk about it in front of 16,000 people. Trying to think of one recently we can talk about. Can you come back to me? Give me a second to think. Okay. Cindy or Paul?
Yeah. So Paul mentioned Harbor, which I think all of us invested in, but it's basically a platform for making sure that security tokens trade in a compliant way. Another recent one that I think at least Kyle is in, I'm not sure if Paul is in as well, is that I'm pretty excited about is MobileCoin.
We're in MobileCoin as well.
Okay, awesome. Yeah.
MobileCoin.
So on the theme of privacy and making privacy more accessible, this is a team that started the Signal chat app, and their goal is to basically make sending privacy coins much more easy and accessible to the average everyday user than privacy coins are currently set up.
Yeah, so one investment that, actually I'll talk about two things that we've done recently. One that just got announced today, but we did a while ago, is Oasis Labs. I'm not quite sure who else is in that, but it's a really strong team. I've known John for a long time, PhD at UC Berkeley. Again, they're using hardware for privacy, but then also have figured out ways for scalability. So that's a bet, I think. Yeah, there's quite a few crypto firms in that one. So that's an example of some of the themes that we've talked about earlier. And then outside of that, I don't know if we're supposed to be talking about venture, but we're looking at a few different types of exchanges still. Yeah, infrastructure. one that we've made recently in Asia, and this is a derivatives play, and the one in Asia is just regular fiat to crypto. But I think, you know, obviously exchanges are dependent upon regulations and what happens within a certain country. But I think that is a moat that exchanges can create, is if you are able to, you know, sort of have the reg tech expertise within your firm and be able to have the relationships with the government, with the banks, to be able to sort of create a barrier for some of the other entrants. So that's kind of a theme that we've been looking for with exchanges.
Great. Kyle, did you think of one?
Yeah, I did. So I'm thinking about Tari recently. So Tari is a project led by Naveen Jain, Dan Turi, and Ricardo Spagni, otherwise known as Fluffy Pony. And the reason we're so excited about Tari is a few reasons. One, the team is one of the strongest ones in crypto. Naveen is an awesome serial entrepreneur. He's had a lot of great success before. And he's just an absolute bulldozer. I mean, if anything is in his way, like, he will knock it down. Dan is one of the foremost experts in the ticketing space, and you know, Fluffy Pony, of course. I mean, how many people on the planet have built a multi-billion-dollar blockchain that really truly works and is truly meaningfully decentralized? And the answer is there's like 5 or 6 people, and Fluffy Pony is one of them. And so, you know, looking at this team together, it's an incredibly strong and diverse team across a lot of different fronts. And then they're going after a very specific use case, which is digital assets. And digital assets make perfect sense to me that they should be on blockchains. And so I think this team is going to really, really, really nail digital assets. And like where that blossoms from there, who knows? But I love their super tight focus, and the strength of the team is very impressive. So we're super excited. We backed Tari about 6 months ago, and it's been great to see their progress.
Yeah, I'll echo that. We also love Tari. I think it's one of the best teams in the space. So we're almost running out of time. I saw a lot of people want to ask you guys for advice about creating their own investment companies, getting
Hello, everyone. We're back at Hack Summit. Thanks for tuning in. And we're joined now by Brian Fox, who is the co-founder of the Orchid protocol. And Brian Fox actually holds the record. He is the only speaker at Hack Summit who has spoken at all 3 events that we've held, because we love him so much, and he's such an awesome guy to chat with. You're just gonna love this guy's energy. He's amazing, and we're gonna have a great conversation about Orchid. But just a little bit more about Brian and his background. So he's a developer himself, but he's also an entrepreneur and he's a consultant, and he's an advocate of free software. So I don't know if you guys know this, but he actually was the original author of the GNU Bash shell back in the day, and he built the first online banking software for Wells Fargo. He also had the chance to collaborate with Richard Stallman. Back in 1985, he was the first employee of the Free Software Foundation. And he also authored the Bash shell, which is widely used in most modern versions of various flavors of Unix, as well as GNU Finger, and contributed to GGB and Emacs. So he's an amazing open source contributor. And now he's helping us with the next generation privacy layer to help us with security on the blockchain. Brian, thanks so much for being here with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Ed.
Awesome. And by the way, Brian also has a guitar with him, so he may be playing for us later, if I can talk him into it. He's an incredible musician, as I've recently learned. So Brian, it's great to see you again. Thanks for being with us here. Maybe you could fill the audience in a little bit about yourself and your background, how you got started programming, what got you into open source originally, and how you think about open source.
Right. Okay. Well, let me start by just kind of sharing this one slide with you here. This is kind of my existence. The world started for me back in 1960 or so, and I don't know if you can tell which person I am in this nursery school photograph. There's a better picture, in case it's hard to tell which one I am. So,
Hello, everyone. We're back at Hack Summit. Thanks for tuning in. And we're joined now by Brian Fox, who is the co-founder of the Orchid Protocol. And Brian Fox actually holds the record. He is the only speaker at Hack Summit who has spoken at all 3 events that we've held because we love him so much, and he's such an awesome guy to chat with. You're just gonna love this guy's energy. He's amazing. And we're gonna have a great conversation about Orchid. But just a little bit more about Brian and his background. So he's a developer himself, but he's also an entrepreneur and he's a consultant. And he's an advocate of free software. So I don't know if you guys know this, but he actually was the original author of the GNU Bash shell back in the day. And he built the first online banking software for Wells Fargo. He also had the chance to collaborate with Richard Stallman. Back in 1985, he was the first employee of the Free Software Foundation. And he also authored the Bash shell, which is widely used in most modern versions of various flavors of Unix, as well as GNU Finger, and contributed to GGB and Emacs. So he's an amazing open source contributor, and now he's helping us with the next generation privacy layer to help us with security on the blockchain. Brian, thanks so much for being here with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. And by the way, Brian also has a guitar with him, so he may be playing for us later, if I can talk him into it. He's an incredible musician, as I've recently learned. So Brian, it's great to see you again. Thanks for being with us here. Maybe you could fill the audience in a little bit about yourself and your background, how you got started programming, what got you into open source originally, and how you think about open source.
Right. Okay. Well, let me start by just kind of sharing this one slide with you here. This is kind of my existence. The world started for me back in 1960 or so, and I don't know if you can tell which person I am in this nursery school photograph. There's a better picture, in case it's hard to tell which one I am. So you had asked how I got started in programming, and it's pretty simple. My dad was an acoustical physicist. And he worked at a place called Boperanic and Newman. I think he was still playing. So he had a teletype in the basement of our house, and it was an exciting machine for me. I don't know if people are used to seeing teletypes, but it was an exciting machine. It had a G key that has the word bell written on it. And if you hold down the control key and you hit G, the bell rings. So around age 6, I would just ring the bell nonstop, and that was my kind of introduction to it.
So I'm going to pull up my presentation here on this topic. And a lot of these best practices are universally useful, not just for starting a blockchain company, but for starting any kind of company at all. So hopefully you'll find this useful. And I learned some of these best practices over starting 3 companies over my life. So I'm 41 years old, and my first company I created pretty much right out of college. I built a software developer training consulting company, and that company was subsequently acquired. And I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to manage anyone or lead anyone, and so I made every mistake you could imagine. So hopefully this can be helpful for you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So audience, give me a thumbs up if you can hear this and if you can see the presentation. So there's my email address. If you guys have questions about any of these best practices, just go ahead and send an email to me afterwards. I'm going to present it not in full screen mode because I've noticed that there's some issues with the video when I'm doing that. So I'm just going to leave it in windowed mode like this. So one thing you'll notice that's interesting about this presentation is that every slide in this presentation is going to be very visual in nature. And the reason why it's visual is because it's a mnemonic device to help you remember things. So, so the theory here is that if you can associate a bold, vivid image with a best practice, hopefully you'll keep it in mind and you won't have to memorize as much and forget what you're taught here. So this first picture that I'll show you here is a picture of a lady playing the violin, and she's extremely passionate about it. You can see it. She's going crazy. Her violin's on fire. And this is kind of a mnemonic device to remember the following best practice when starting a company, blockchain or otherwise, which is to basically work on what you're passionate about and to try to find your passion. So the challenge that a lot of entrepreneurs have and a lot of engineers have is, how do you find something that you're passionate about? How do you find a project that you think that might be something that you can turn into a company someday? And building a company takes many years. It takes sometimes 5 or 10 years or longer to make it successful. And even with a blockchain type of project, you still should be thinking along those time horizons. It's not like a get-rich-quick scheme or anything like that. The best things in life take work and take energy. And so you could be passionate about for a long period of time is absolutely critical. And so a lot of my friends ask me, well, how do I find that idea that I'm passionate about? And the answer that I give them these days actually came to me when I read a very interesting blog post recently, which is that you can actually choose your passion rather than finding your passion. So what does that mean? To just a little bit passionate about, even if you're not incredibly passionate about it yet. But if you have an inkling for why you might like it, why you might be interested in it, then by working on that project and by investing engineering time into that project, it'll actually help you to become more passionate about it over time. Because by working on something and by mastering it, it actually releases endorphins in your mind. And it causes you to be more confident in your skills. And that's what actually causes you to become more passionate about the projects. You can actually manufacture passion in some ways. So I wouldn't spend too much time worrying about, is this something that I'm incredibly passionate about or just a little bit passionate about? It's okay. As long as you're just somewhat passionate about it, the passion should grow over time as you spend more time on it. So like a good example of this would be a new programming language, right? You're not going to be a master of a new programming language right away. Let's say you decide you want to learn how to program on Ethereum. Initially Solidity might be a daunting technology for you to learn, and it might not be familiar to you. But as you start to learn and use it, you'll become better, and those endorphins will be released. So when building a company on the blockchain, that's even more important. Then the next thing to think about is, how do you form a team that will actually work on a project like this? And my general advice to engineers is to actually not worry too much about starting a team too quickly. Because if you notice, some of the best companies in the world, the way they get started is that your gut instinct might be, I have an idea for a new blockchain. Let me raise a bunch of money. Let me put a team together. Well, I would actually argue that you might want to think about doing the opposite of that, which is to, instead of raising a lot,
Mas você não tem noção do que eu fiquei senhora arrumando e acontece isso.